Welcome, everyone. My name is Eric Pennington, and welcome to another videocast inside of the Mental Wellbeing Ministry here at Violet. Joining me today is Anita Rowe. Anita is a licensed professional clinical counselor at Directions Counseling in Worthington, Ohio, and she is being gracious and wonderful to join us today. Anita has been in practice over about 10 years. And I think you are going to get a lot out of our time together today. So Anita, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So let's jump right in, Anita. I know we've had some conversations prior to doing this, so I think you kind of know where I was heading. I mean, we're living in a very volatile, rapid change environment in life, right? And certainly everybody's going to be able to reference the pandemic and some of the other things that have happened that have been big. But I want to start today, for those who are maybe tuning in or watching this, and maybe they're in that side of it that say, I don't really know, do I need to go see a counselor? Maybe, you know, it's been kind of tough. They're really kind of, I don't really know. So could we start with, what's a way in which someone could maybe have an understanding of, I should probably talk to a clinician?
Sure. You know, historically, people would think like you have to be way out there, right, to go to a counselor. You're hearing voices, or maybe you can't get out of bed because of depression, right. Or, you know, you're having panic attacks when you leave the house. Those are the big indicators. But, you know, today we're looking to just help the general population. So it might just be like, dang, like something feels off, like emotionally, and I'm not quite sure what it is, or I'm struggling with something from the past that keeps arising. And here's the thing that baffles me. We have all of these professionals in numerous types of fields that people are willing to go see. We go to the doctor if we're sick for more than a couple of days, right? We go to the pastor if we want spiritual leading. We get a financial advisor if we want, you know, to work on retirement, and we get a personal trainer if we want to work on fitness. And all of, you know, we go to college to learn. So let's go to a professional who can help us with our emotional well-being. And the idea that we have to have it all together, this is just something you should automatically know, like that's a misnomer, right? We're not equipped to just know all of our emotions or how to deal with them or how to deal with stress. So yeah, there could be any reason why somebody comes, and it might just be, you know, a new job and they don't know how to adjust. And maybe they just need a few sessions. Or it might be ongoing things like, you know, ongoing depression or anxiety, or, you know, trauma. So yeah, any reason is a good enough reason.
Well, yeah, I agree with you. And I'm so glad that you used that sort of the analogy of the various professionals that we go to when we have a need, right?
Yeah.
Because I do believe, even though I think, at least from my vantage point, it's improving a bit as far as how we look at mental health, mental well-being. I think far too often it was really a case of, that's the one thing I don't want to have to do, right?
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
And I know for me, in my quote contact list, I have my endocrinologist, I have my primary care physician, I have my like clinical counselor. They're all there. Now, there's going to be different times in my life where I'm going to one maybe more than another, but I never want to look at it as, oh my gosh, I guess now I have to do this type thing, you know, because our brains need that help too.
Yeah. And it's the idea that something's wrong with me if I need help in this area. You know, it's okay if I need help because, you know, my spleen is off kilter, right. You know, but if my brain or my mental state, my emotions are off, like there's so much, you know, stigma on that. And like you said, it is declining, thank goodness. And it's okay. Like we can all use some help.
So it's interesting to me too, when I think about the dynamic of how we live in America and our culture, right? And I wonder sometimes, truly, you know, it's just anecdotal in my head, you know, we're very obsessed with sports. We all know that in the United States. And though that I'm not indicting the love of sport, I I do believe sometimes has that winner loser thing kind of contributed to it, because we equate that if something's off, you use that example, we see that as a loss. And we don't want to say there's a loss, when in reality, this thing called life is so ever moving, changing. Do you find that once the people that you help kind of go, oh, wait a minute, this is really, there's nothing wrong with me, do they get a sense of like, oh, a lift? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I find so many times, especially the people who have been very self-sufficient throughout their life, they always have it together. They can always push through, pull up your pants by your bootstrap or whatever the saying is, and just be okay. Like eventually even that mindset like catches up to them and they're like, I don't like that I have to be here, but I can't keep doing things the way that I'm doing. I'm not okay anymore. And it's just such a relief to them to get all these things off their chest and to say, you know what, you're under a lot of stress. If you look at everything that you've been through over how many years, and you've just kind of always pushed through it, like no wonder you're feeling stressed or losing sleep or not eating well, or feeling like you're, lashing out at your spouse who just wants a cup of water, right? So it catches up, but so many people find relief just in the first session because now they're in a safe place to talk about it, or at least feel validated in some way.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. That's a good launching point into a topic that I know is being tossed around a lot these days, and that is trauma. And I know, like anything that becomes very much a part of our, day to day as it relates to a topic, it can swing both ways, right? I've encountered people who think that they lost, they didn't get picked for the job. They see that as trauma, and then it can swing the other way to another extreme. So for the purposes of our time together today, Anita, could you maybe help us with what's a good working definition of what trauma is?
Yeah. So, I looked up the official and I'm going to read that one.
All right, cool.
And then I'll give you my short version.
Okay.
So here's a defined definition. Trauma is the response to a deeply distressing or disturbing event that overwhelms an individual's ability to cope, causing feelings of helplessness, diminishes their sense of self and their ability to feel a full range of emotions and experiences. So, in short, I would say trauma is anything that causes distress to the point that you don't know if you're okay, right? But here's also the thing, like everybody has trauma. Everybody's been through something that most people would consider a trauma, a loss, a car accident, a move, being bullied, all these things. But not every trauma is traumatizing to a person. Okay, so one person might be in a car accident and it was life-threatening. The car flipped over 3 times. They landed at a pool, but they were able to, walk away with just a broken wrist or bruises. That person may be able to get back in the car the next day, feel a little bit nervous, but be okay. And then after a while, like have no problem at all. So they don't feel traumatized by that, but the very next person, maybe somebody in the same car accident, might have a severely difficult time getting in a car again because to them it was traumatizing. So sometimes people get frustrated. A victim of trauma might feel frustration when other people say, I wouldn't look at it like I could get through that just fine. Right. I actually had an old acquaintance say to me, I don't think I'd ever get PTSD because my faith in God is so good, so high. And I'm like, that's a very ignorant statement because we're not self-reliant. We can't always just not be impacted to the extent, that we don't have these feelings or distress emotionally.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
When you said that, because I know that in the evangelical community, there can be, and I'm basing this on my experience, there's this idea that God doesn't want me to have PTSD, so I just need to pray and believe him.
mhm,
And I've kind of taken the tack that I agree with you. God probably doesn't want you to have PTSD,
sure.
but God has also put on this planet clinicians as a tool in his hands to get you to overcome that.
Mhm,
Because sometimes I think, and I'm using again my experience, the times when I've resisted getting help have been when I really, when we peel back all the layers, it's just I'm afraid of going and talking to somebody about it. Or
mhm.
that will look like I'm not sufficient. So I'm going
Yeah,
to,
I'm weak.
yeah,
I'm
I'm
weak if
weak.
I need help.
Yeah,
Yeah.
where's your faith? Well, why can't
Yeah.
you're not relying on the Lord enough, whatever. And again, everybody has their journey and the discovery and all of the rest. And I
Mhm,
don't want to rob anyone of that. I think about it in that sense of what you described, that there are, I watched this video, and hopefully I'm not going to go down a rabbit hole, and you have my permission, Anita. If I start to go down a rabbit hole, you can pull me out.
Okay.
But I'm listening to this video or watching this video, and it's from Brene Brown, who's a researcher, I think University of Houston, and she's done a lot, written a lot, and all that. But she said something I thought was interesting about empathy for others and their struggles, right? And trauma,
Mhm,
obviously, being that, and that it's not so much you and I saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm gonna try to walk in your shoes." She kind of turned it a bit and said,
mhm,
one of the best ways is to be willing to give them your time to listen to their story and then believe them.
mhm. Yes, because they're the only ones that get to say how it impacted them.
Anita, that's exactly what she was pointing to. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So we
Um,
don't have to experience the same thing that they did to like understand it, right? We don't have to like be in their shoes, but we can say, "Oh my gosh, like that must be really hard for you." Right? It's
yeah.
that kind of understanding that people want to be believed.
Yeah. And the thing that it got me thinking about, because I went into that mode of like, okay, well, number one, am I giving people my time to listen
Mhm,
and am I willing to believe them? And she
mhm,
threw out some other points about one of the reasons why we have a hard time with believing them is because we don't want to see points of view that are different than ours, right? I
yeah.
mean, again, we can kind of come back into some of the evangelical side of the equation and go, well, my point of view is that God can heal me of all of these things in every situation. And then I
Mhm,
encounter someone who's like having a real difficult time that makes me uncomfortable because I want them to see it the way I see it. The
mhm.
reality is, it's kind of our best help is listen and believe them, you know?
Yeah.
And
And there's so much judgment there, right? So if we're saying, you know what, like God can heal everybody, but we don't know what Paul's thorn in the flesh was. Like, was that temptation? Was it addiction?
right,
Was
right.
it mental health? Like, we don't know what it was, but God didn't take that away from him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And, we have to accept and believe where people are and love them for it. So,
yeah, that's a key. That's a key, right?
yeah, yeah,
Um, so I like how you worded that about everyone experiences trauma, but not everyone is traumatized by that.
yeah,
Right? And I'm
yes,
poorly
yeah,
paraphrasing what you said, but
yeah.
I guess I want to kind of move to uh, whether it's the car accident or whether it's a son or daughter that's decided they're going off the rails, they're going to do their own thing, they don't have
Mhm,
anything to do with God, that kind of thing.
mhm.
So how do we move to healing after we've experienced the trauma? And I know that has a lot of layers, but kind of maybe
Yeah.
what are some of the ways that we can move toward healing?
Yeah, and you're right. So many layers, it's complicated, and it depends on if the trauma was recent, right? So if it's recent, then the initial phase is like survival mode. Like
Yes, right,
you
right.
just have to get through the day and the moment and the hour. And so we'll start with that, like the first phase. And I always encourage people, you know what, like you need a support system. Like that's just given. And sometimes me as a clinician is the only support that a client has. And that obviously is not my goal at all. I want people to have other people in their life. So sometimes I have emailed a pastor and say, hey, is there a mentor that my client can be given, right? Because they need somebody to walk with them.
Yeah.
So having support is really important. I tell people to look for air bubbles. When you're so overwhelmed with life, the event, the stress, like you feel like you're drowning, you just have to find one little pocket of air for the moment to take a breath right then. And those air bubbles might be stepping away for 3 minutes and taking deep breaths. It might be calling a friend. It might be taking a nap, like whatever you need to survive in that moment, you have to do it.
Okay.
Okay. So to not worry, well, how's this going to look? Or what are people going to think about? You know what? It doesn't even matter, because like when you're in that crisis mode, like you just have to, somehow get to that next minute. So something for me, and not every client that comes is, a person of faith. So I always respect where they are in their walk or lack of walk with God. But for me, like anytime I'm under distress or in a crisis, like I lean into God. I wish, let me rephrase that. When there are big crises in my life, I really lean into God. I wish I did over the smaller things. Unfortunately, I don't. But what I've learned, and one of the scriptures that really stood out to me and was so meaningful at a big time in my life when I was so broken and destroyed, was the verse, what is it? Romans, it's in Romans 8:26 or something, where it says that the Holy Spirit intercedes with groanings. Like when you don't know how to pray, the Holy Spirit is there. So when you're laying on the floor in tears and you have in so much pain and you don't even know how to express it or what to ask for, like you just put yourself before God, knowing like he knows what's in my heart. He knows the brokenness. And then the verse that says that God bottles up our tears, like he holds them in a bottle, like our tears. Like how special is that he cares so much. So for me, that spiritual walk and just like knowing like he's there for us is very, very encouraging. And no, he doesn't just snap away all of the pain, but he can bring comfort. So and then I wanted to touch on 3 misbeliefs that we take on when life feels like a tragedy. So, and I wish I remembered where I got this. It's not original, but there's this belief that this thing that happened to us is permanent. Yes, the outcome might be permanent. Divorce might be permanent. Death might be permanent. A move might be permanent, but the problem is not permanent. It feels permanent. Oh my gosh, like my spouse cheated. That was one of my experiences. And like, you feel like your life is over, like you're ruined and you're never going to be okay. And like, you worry about the shame and the reputation and all the things that come with that brokenness. It feels permanent, but it's not. Right. So the outcome might be permanent, but the problem is not. Otherwise, how could we bear the problems we've had our whole life? What you experienced 2 years ago, hopefully you're not still carrying that. Right.
Yeah.
So there's that belief that, the crisis of the situation wants you to feel. And, we can challenge that to say, you know what, like, I'm not okay right now, but I'm going to be somehow. I don't know how, but somehow. So another misbelief is that the problem is personal. This is why people like turn against God and say, God did this to me. He's out to get me. Or like, why me? Like, what did I do to deserve this? And the fact is, like, millions of people have been cheated on. Millions of people have been sexually abused. Millions of people have been neglected, and all of these were some of my traumas. And it's not personal to me because it's what happens in the human race. But it feels very personal, right? So yes, when you're betrayed by a spouse, yes, that's personal to your relationship, but it's not unique, as in you're the only one, that is being punished somehow for your wrongdoing or not being good enough.
Yeah.
So the last one is, we believe that it's pervasive. The problem is pervasive, which means it takes over everything in our life. So yes, our emotions, we do carry it everywhere because we're a mess, right? We feel broken, destroyed. We can't get it off our mind. There's obsession and all the things that come with trauma. We carry it emotionally everywhere we go, but the problem is not in every area. So maybe you lost your marriage, but did you lose your job? Did you lose your home? Did you lose your friends? Did you lose your spiritual walk? Did you lose your health? Right? If we have some of those, it's not pervasive.
Yeah.
Okay. Even though it feels like it. So to challenge this idea that everything in my world is crashing down because that's what the emotions say, we can like rely on the fact, you know what, like I have something, I have to cling to something.
Yeah.
So.
Wow. Yeah, that's profound. So when I think about healing, and obviously I know when you go through trauma and after the experience, there is an urgency after survival, at least it was for me, to where, okay, how do I get to the place when I'm whole, when it's no longer an issue, quote, right? I had a window of time in my life when I was a teenager where I had 2 summers in a row where really big traumatic events happened. And I remember I got to a place after that where I started, whenever June came around, I started feeling a lot of anxiety. And part of it was, okay, I wonder, or is there another event coming?
Yeah.
Now, when I was that young, eventually, you move, you're 15, you're 16, you're 17, you keep moving. But then I found, even into my adult years, there's sometimes in June when I'll start to look around and I'll start to feel that, anxiety. And where I'm going with this, Anita, is that I have one of the tools that I use in my life, and it is a God thing. It's the Holy Spirit, allowing the Holy Spirit to remind me, Eric, this is not June of 1979 and June of 1980. You are in a different time and place. You have no reason to feel and to fear. Oh, that's right. That's right, Anita. This isn't 1980. That was a long time ago. Yeah, it did happen. It was traumatic.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean that every summer. So I guess where I'm going, when I say complete healing, I know that can be relative, because someone could say, well, Eric, you still are dealing with trauma because you're thinking about, you have this anxiety sometimes when June comes around. I don't think that necessarily means I'm not healed, as much as, is that a case of where maybe that's a trigger? Maybe that's just a, I don't know. Maybe I'll throw that out. There it is. See, hey, Anita, I'd like your input on that.
Yeah, and that's so tricky because, if you're being triggered, are you healed? Right. And so this idea, like, healing is on a spectrum, just like everything else is. And
great. I'm glad you said it that way.
So there are some people who have one isolated incident of trauma.
Yeah.
And, that's what we call acute trauma. So it's one thing that happened, and they're more likely to find complete healing because it was once, but depending again on the severity of what it was and what it meant to them. Okay. And then there's chronic trauma, where there's events that happen over and over and over. Like part of my trauma, and people don't see, and sometimes I'm even embarrassed to say this because it doesn't look like it should be a trauma, but in a 19-year marriage where my ex-husband was addicted to pornography, like year after year after year, like I suffered from him wanting that instead of me
Yeah.
being, everywhere in public, he's looking around. And like, since then I've been diagnosed with PTSD. Like, oh, how do you get PTSD from your spouse looking at porn? Right. So, but because it happened so many times in such a long time over my life, right? Like 20 years practically of my adult life. There's still things that trigger me, and I have to take care of that or get support because it's hard to handle, right? So when somebody's been in ongoing chronic form of trauma, it's hard. And then there's complex PTSD. So this is the trauma that people experience, numerous types of traumas. So maybe the child who's being physically abused at home might also experience a form of sexual abuse and being bullied in school, right? That different types of trauma all within the same time period is very, very hard. So there are what I call lifers, PTSD lifers, who just have to learn how to manage it the best that they can. Okay, so healing is complicated, right?
And I'm glad you kind of leveled that a bit, because I think it's interesting because you brought up the Apostle Paul and the thorn, and I think that there was a tremendous, that's so relatable when you think about that in 2 Corinthians, when he goes into that detail, right? And I know for me, anything I've experienced has drawn me closer to God. It's made me more dependent. It's made me realize I need you. I can't do this thing called life without you. And then you kind of go, isn't that interesting? God allowing these whatever, and it produces this fruit of dependence and need. It's kind of contrary to how our culture operates, I know, obviously, right? But I think there's tremendous victory in being able to, and I go in my case, being able to go, yes, Holy Spirit, you're right. This is not 1980. This is today. And this is where I'm at now in my journey. And you're with me. I mean, because I think the danger, and this is the part about America that concerns me, when we are so focused on being okay or being together, right? That we think that the real victory in God is when I don't have any of these issues. I never had to deal with that.
Yeah, right.
I'm not in that place. I'm not in that mode, not realizing that your independence is threatening what you really need is dependence.
Right.
Just
that's so real because, every time I felt devastation, like even recently, my relationship was kind of re-traumatized, my current one. Well, now an ex, because I was with somebody who didn't respect my trauma and ended up doing the same thing, right? So we have to look at, like, we have to surround ourselves with people who support and validate your experiences while you also have to work on yourself, right? No one person can be everything that you need, but part of healing is removing people, things that are still causing, right? So the pain, the trauma, and I read this thing once, I think it was just a post on Facebook. You can't heal in the same place that made you sick.
Oh, wow.
Right. So if, this pertains a lot to, like, even people who are being verbally abused by a spouse or a significant other, how many times is there pressure to, just do your part, just pray about it, and I'm not saying you shouldn't, but you absolutely should fight as long as possible. But if you're losing yourself, if it's breaking you down, if it's re-traumatizing you, is it the right thing? Is it healthy for you to be in a situation that doesn't validate your experience?
Yeah. And, you said something there about respecting your trauma, which,
Mhm.
I've had this conversation with my family about, it's easy to point out where someone is failing at something, where they're not living up to what we have as an expectation, whether
Mhm.
that's in behavior. And I mean this not so much in the sense that someone who's doing something that is wrong or unethical, but maybe we just feel like, hey, you shouldn't lose your temper, or hey, you should be willing to accept my point of view. Is that always to try to remember, you really need to know, you need to get more information on their journey before you begin to
Mhm. Mhm.
say, hey, why are you doing that? Well, you
Yeah.
should stop doing that, or what have you. And again, I want to make sure it's clear for everyone out there. We're not talking about someone who's fallen into sinful behavior. You're not supposed to excuse that away. I'm talking
Mhm.
about maybe it's that clashing of, I see it this way, you see it this way. I don't think in large part we as a culture are very curious anymore. We're not really like, do I am I willing to spend time with this person and understand what they've gone through,
Mhm.
how they formed their opinions, how they formed how they see the world, how they see God? Because until you do that, I think you're going to be much more likely to just judge them, because that's easy,
Yeah,
right?
there's so many assumptions, right? And
Yeah.
there's always a reason why people act the way that they do, or, even like shutting down or withdrawing. Like there's a reason for
Yeah.
that. And, if we can get curious instead of judgmental,
Yeah.
right, to gain understanding, not that it can excuse the behavior, right? So we all hear about people who have maybe there's the war veteran who comes home with PTSD. Like we all know why there's
Yeah. Yeah.
PTSD.
Yeah.
And so that person, male, female, whoever, like maybe like blowing up at their family or withdrawing or like drinking themselves, to death every day. We can understand like how they got there. And we
Yeah.
need to. At some point though, what when do we expect, or when can we show, let's come alongside them to get them help? Like
Yeah.
when is it their responsibility to say, you know what, I don't want to live this way anymore, right? It's no longer an excuse. Like my childhood is no longer an excuse. What happened in my past marriage is no longer an excuse for any misbehavior.
Yeah.
Right, so we can
Yeah.
always
Yeah.
work on behavior. And I had a friend recently, and this has really impacted me, talk about a lot of times the church and Christians, like we focus on what people are doing
Yeah.
when we should be focusing on how can we help them have a closer relationship with God, because if they're seeking God, those behaviors are going to diminish. So let's make the focus about, if they have to be accountable to something, like let's make them accountable to their prayer life or to their surrender or to their obedience to God, rather than, well, did you do that? Or, why did that happen?
Yeah.
So,
That is the one area I'm, and it's really been, as my kids are young adults now. So, when I think about it, and I've kind of I've thought about, as they were growing up, about the importance of intimacy with God. And, I think sometimes if we're not careful, especially living in the culture that we live in, be it inside the church, outside the church, whatever you want to use, is that we are focusing on, um, what are you doing, right?
yeah,
How are you performing,
yeah.
right? And I think intimacy with God is what shapes what we're doing, right? To your
Mhm.
point,
Yes,
right?
very much so.
And I sometimes wonder, if we made that kind of turn, we might find that, and again, I'm kind of echoing what you said, that maybe those things that are causing issues become more diminished because of the closeness that they have
Mhm.
with God.
Mhm.
But oh my goodness, what happens if we do it the other way? Because if it's always about what you're doing, then I'm going to work hard on performing.
Right.
So
Right.
I'm going to work hard on, when I see Anita at church, everything's great. I'm wonderful. Just got a new job, just bought a new car, just joined this, just built a that, because I'm going to perform for you as I would for, any person that I run into. I'm always thinking in terms of how do I position it that it shows that I've checked the box. I did it, but there's no intimacy in that,
Right. Right.
Okay, so I want to pivot.
Yeah.
There's something that we kind of talked about and exchanged a bit around core beliefs. And I want you to touch on that and correct me if I'm wrong, areas of growth and core beliefs, right?
Yes. Yes.
These are things that if we sort of focus in on, they can help us as we're going through the process of healing and maybe beyond?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
So
So,
can you touch on that?
everybody has core beliefs. We're all like, our values that we're raised with, those are core beliefs, right? One value that I was raised with is God has your back, right? No matter what. So he's always been my rock. Like I can turn to him, even though I stray now and then, like he's always there. And like, I believe that. And so even when bad things happen, I'm not typically like, not that I don't get angry with God. I'm like, sometimes, yeah, I ask why, I get frustrated and, cry to him or whatever. But, the bottom line is I'm not going to stay angry with God because I know he has my best interest. But the person who doesn't have that core belief, they can walk away from God or never involve him in their life. Or people have a core belief like therapy means you're crazy, right? So they might not show up in a therapy office.
Right.
So we're raised to have core beliefs, and some of them are good, some not so good, right? So our traumas, our experiences develop core beliefs sometimes. So in my experience, I took on this core belief that I'm not good enough, or my husband wouldn't be looking around, right? He wouldn't be having an affair. He wouldn't be wanting something besides me. I'm not good enough. I'm not beautiful. I'm not sexy. Like all the things that women and some obviously men too can struggle with. So I didn't feel that way until that experience, right? And all of a sudden, over time, because it wasn't one incident, it was repeated incidents, I took on this belief about myself. And so I really, had to take a look at that. And fortunately, because my core belief that God has me, I was able to lay myself out before him and have that. I told you about the experience I had where God came into the room with me and wrapped me up and told me that I was lovable and acceptable. And, that was several years ago. And I still lean on that. And I still feel that from him on occasion when I put myself into his arms, right? He's there for that. And I've been able to God has been transforming that core belief within me. Okay. So I am 80% better in that core belief than I was. So I'm not 100%, right? But I'm 80% there. And I know my worth and my value today because I worked on that core belief and I let God change that for me. So when we look at our traumas, 25% of people get stuck in trauma and they choose to not heal because they get caught up on certain things that become core belief. Okay. So one of them is never coming to terms with why. Why did this happen? Well, here's the thing, like if we look at this like scale, the balance, right? The trauma is here, it's weighing you down. And we want the answer to weigh just as much, the reason, because then it would be understandable. Right. So, for example, when you have a loved one that, or a child that dies in a car accident, we're like, why them? Why at that age? Why in that way? All of these things that we want an answer for, like if we got the answer, it would match the devastation, but it never does. So people get stuck on the why. Or the what if, that bargaining phase that says, what if this, or if only that. And they never come to terms that sometimes there is no answer, and there's nothing that's going to feel good enough for this to have happened to you. So, and they develop this core belief that about themselves or about the world. I am broken. I'm unlovable. I'm, unworthy. I'm bad. Maybe somebody actually did a horrific thing, right? And they're in prison. They might feel like they're so bad, they're never going to be good enough to amount to anything, or take on beliefs about the world. The world is dangerous. No one can be trusted. All men cheat. All women cheat. Everyone wants your money. Like all of the things, right? Core beliefs are developed, and we have to look at what are our core beliefs. And I work with a lot of people, and I really try to get to the root of their belief system, because our lens for life is viewed out of our core beliefs.
I believe that.
So, I might have a 45, 50-year-old client who's struggling with anxiety. And over time, we come to find out she believes anything bad that happens is her fault. Well, no wonder she's anxious, right? So there was a core belief there that we had to work through and, identify. So, just because we think something, believe something, have a feeling, doesn't mean it's the truth.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So we have to match it. As Christians, we want to match our belief system and our values with God's word, right? As non-believers, which I also work with, I match, let's say, does this belief system, is it healthy? Okay, so we don't have to talk about God. They don't have to know I'm praying for them in the session as we're talking, but is their belief system healthy? If they grew up believing that they're stupid and they're still telling themselves that, I could say, is that a healthy way to look at yourself? And everybody would say, well, no, but okay, let's stop the but. Is this healthy? Let's get you healthy.
Yeah. And I would imagine that term, that word resonates with many people, because everybody ultimately would answer, I want to be healthy. Absolutely.
Yes. Okay. So then the 5 areas of growth, and I'll touch on real quick because I know we're running short. So
no, you're good.
Yeah. So mental growth. This is about like, how can I grow my mind, my thoughts, my beliefs, right? It's all about how we think. It's about our values in life. Do I want to travel? Like, do I want an education? Are politics important to me? So learning to grow in a way mentally might just mean, you know what, I'm going to study the Bible more so I have better understanding, or I'm going to take that class I've always wanted. I'm going to learn that new hobby, right? So it's that cognitive functioning.
And Anita, if I could ask you within that, and maybe it'll apply to the other ones as well. You're talking about a consistent, intentional thing, right?
Well, it could be either way. Right.
Okay.
So when somebody's in the middle of, and I know I didn't get through all the phases of healing, but when they're in my office, maybe in phase 2, where they're on that roller coaster, they're no longer in the crisis, but there's ups and there's downs. Some days are good, some not so good. I say, hey, let's incorporate something into your life that you can focus on. Right. Do you need to take the art class? Right. Do you need to start exercising? Which it's a physical and a mental one, but so it can be temporary to get through something, but it might be ongoing, which here's the thing, when we stop growing, depression happens. So yes and no to your answer. Okay.
Sorry, I didn't mean to take you off.
No. That's perfectly fine.
But keep going. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. So emotional growth is self-reflection. Like, what have I done in this past, relationship that I need to work on? Like, what are my flaws? And should I have been, so in their face about something? Should I step back and walk away sooner? Like things like that. Or it's about like, you know what? I know I have friends, but I don't reach out. I'm going to start connecting more. I'm going to share more. I'm going to be more vulnerable. I'm going to receive compliments, right? So learning to open up more emotionally, sharing more with your significant other or a friend, just getting more connected on that emotional level.
Okay.
Which also ties into that social growth. So sometimes social growth is, I always turn people down for events, but it's good for me, so I should go. This time I'm gonna go, right? And so, man, I didn't want to go, but I'm so glad I did.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So that happens a lot with people.
Yeah.
Like they don't think it's something that they want, they don't feel like it, but they know it's good for them, and it ended up being a good thing. So, and some of these tie together, right? So if you go to let's say that your church is having a Bible study, so you're getting that mental growth by learning something, you're getting the social growth because you're around people and you're having discussions, and maybe there's emotional growth because people are opening up about something.
Yeah.
Right. So you're learning to receive others' emotions. You're becoming vulnerable. Those are all ways to grow. Another one is physical growth. And this can be basic things like, oh, I haven't had an annual exam for the past 7 years. So maybe that's something maybe I should take a nap more often or get to bed on time so my sleep is better. Maybe it's eating, maybe it's exercising, anything to do with your physical body is that physical growth. So, and then the last one would be spiritual growth, right? So whatever that means, whether it's going to church or listening to sermons online, maybe it's praying more, meditating, worship music. I know I like to listen to worship music when I'm getting ready in the morning. It kind of like sets, that the atmosphere in my mind. And I love like church, and like when the music, like I feel more connected to God when I'm worshiping with music. So yeah, any of these are ways for people to grow, and there should always be one of these that's happening in their life. So when you talk about the ongoing thing, there should be something of these that's happening, if not more than one.
Wow. It's interesting. There was a gentleman from some years ago. It related to things around the business world. We were in a Zoom session, and we happened to be in the same breakout room. And one of the individuals had said he had a client who was just really beside himself because a trusted employee he had found out was embezzling from him. I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars type thing, right? And he was so disappointed. And this gentleman that's in this breakout room says, I just wish he would have taken me up on what we were offering, and it could have helped him be more cognizant about looking after his books, being more aware, on and on and on. And this other one, this is where the quote comes from. The other gentleman says, you can only draw upon the resources that you've built up until the point of the crisis.
Wow.
And I got to tell you,
Wow.
I sat there and it was like, I don't know, where do we go now? Because that is just, the ultimate mic drop. Because,
Yeah.
and I get it. If we knew when the crisis were coming, everybody could.
You'd be prepared, right?
Yeah, right. But we don't.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, I know there are some that we can kind of we see the storm clouds and we kind of understand what might be coming, but oftentimes they appear. And it really encouraged me to, hey, you know what? Why don't I, in this time that I'm in, where things are, quote, stable or healthy, why don't I build my resources so that, and I think this connects biblically, as Jesus is talking about building the house on the rock or on the sand. He talked about the thief, and coming in the night type thing. And I'm going, yeah, that's vitally important. And when you mention those growth areas, I'm going, that's kind of the same thing. There's this, you're not going to prevent the crisis from coming, but isn't it so much better if you're stronger, if you've got, if you're more grounded, if you, because you're talking about the voices that I'm not worth something, or I'm not good enough, or I'm not smart enough, whatever. But man, isn't it a powerful transformation when you go, no, I know God has got my back.
Yeah.
No, it's not a question of he might, I hope he does.
Yes.
And that when the crisis comes, again, it doesn't eliminate the crisis, but at least, man, there's some navigational tools there
Yes.
that help you.
So much.
Yeah. So I got to ask you about the healthy folks again, quote in quotation.
Yes.
Right? So you have someone who is maybe not going through the deep valley or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe as they're watching this, they're saying, well, man, things are actually going really well for me. What are some things you might say to them that says, okay, yes, things are great for you. Here's how you might want to prepare. I mean, again, kind of going to that building of resources, those kind of, what do you say to the healthy people?
Yeah. So, sometimes we have people come into the office who just have a small life adjustment, what I would call the worried well, right? They're very high functioning, for the most part, they have the coping skills, but they just want to, tweak this one little problem. And some people don't necessarily show up in my office, like they just want to work through it and they do just fine. So for them, I would say, is there balance in their life? Right? Are they growing in some of these ways, but are they doing self-care? Right? Are they saying no when they should say no? Are they saying yes when they should say yes?
Mm-hmm.
Do they have this balance of within all these 5 areas? Is anything off? Does anything need tweaked? Does anything need to be worked on?
Wow.
But one of the main things I failed to hit on is for, crisis and getting through healing is talking about it. Like we have to talk about our problems. Now, I struggle with this idea, but I try to remind myself to understand it. Like sometimes men more so than women can process things internally. Like, so they might go, I don't know, cut wood, work on the car, and they're processing and they're thinking about, they might not need to talk about it as long as they're processing it. Okay. For those of us who are external processors, like we need to unload, like we need to get it off our chest. We need to hear another perspective or at least feel relief. And so I've had men in my office that have, they're not used to unloading or talking or just being emotionally available in those ways that their wife wants them to be.
Right.
But they learn to open up in my office where it seems to be safer. I'm not judging them. I'm not expecting things of them. And they always come back and say, wow, like my relationship with my wife is better. My relationship with my brother is better because I'm more open. Right.
Yeah.
So learning to talk about things is good for everybody. So for the worried well, the healthy people, do they have somebody that can just bounce things off of, even if they can't really like talk about like how embarrassed or ashamed or whatever their emotions are? Can they go to a certain level of vulnerability and get feedback?
Yeah. Okay. So, man, we're running out of time. Anita,
Yeah, I know.
I feel like we could probably go for another hour.
I was like, there's so much I could talk about. There's so much I want to share, but
we'll call this part 1. How about that? So I do want to touch on one more thing before we close out, and that is, as you're aware at Violet, we've been working on growing a specific intentional mental well-being ministry, and one of the things that really stood out to me as we were the beginnings of talking about doing some of this kind of work. And I may have mentioned this in a previous video cast, but there was a member of the church that I was working with in a different realm. And our relationship was such that I had shared that, we want to do this. We want to be more intentional about somebody comes in the church, there's resources, there's something we can point to, what have you. And I just kind of off the cuff said it that way. And then she asked me, well, what would somebody do if they came in and said, I need help? And I remember Anita going, oh my, I had to go, wow, that's true. Well, okay. Then I started going, okay, rationally, I know I could grab a pastor. Okay. I know that's there. There's enough in me that I could say, I could ask maybe some sort of probing questions without it, putting them off, blah, blah, blah. But it was clear to me that we really didn't have, and it's not a fault thing. And I know you know that, but one of the things that I guess I wanted to ask you is, what are some things that the local church can do, or some things the local church can do to support this idea of mental well-being, whether it be some of the things we talked to with trauma, or whether it be the worry well thing that you described. So could you talk a little bit about what the local church might be able to do to strengthen that?
Yeah, well, I think obviously what you're doing here is just increasing awareness. That's the first step. Like, let's start talking about it. Let's normalize it instead of making it like, oh, like you must not have enough faith in God, or something's wrong with you if your mental health isn't on par. So bringing awareness to it, reducing the shame, reducing the stigma. And also there are some pastors, unfortunately, that don't know when to refer. Right. So knowing what your scope of practice, even in my field, like there are things that I cannot treat people for because it's not within my scope of practice.
Right.
So
right.
for a pastor to like kind of discern, is this just a spiritual, not just, I'm sorry, it's very important. Do they need spiritual leading? Do they need trauma healing? Many pastors are not equipped for that process of really getting to the deep roots of the core belief, the upbringing, all the things that a mental health therapist might be more equipped to do. So just knowing when to refer to a professional versus when to just surround that person with spiritual support, which is highly important. So that's one thing. And just having more things go on, like myself, I come in and do talks on anxiety, like give lay people coping skills, just let it be more well known. For the people who don't show up in a therapy office, at least they get something. And I know that's your goal for these video casts. Somebody might not go to therapy, but hopefully they'll gain some kind of insight or strategy for dealing with what's going on. So,
well, I'm very blessed that at Violet, our pastoral leaders are such that, they are very equipped. And I think the evidence of that is their embrace of what we're talking about and what we're doing today. And in addition to some things we've got coming up in the near future. But that's great. Anita, I can't thank you enough for carving out part of your day to spend with us. This has just been great. And as I meant that, part one, part two
okay,
will be forthcoming, because we got much more we can touch on.
Yeah.
And
thank you so much.
We do appreciate it. So everyone, as you're tuning in, we're so appreciative of your attention. If you'd like to learn more about the mental well-being ministry, my name is Eric Pennington. You know how to find me. And certainly there's information on the website as well. There's an actual specific page dedicated to it. So hope you'll check that out as well. Otherwise, have a great day. We look forward to the next time that we're together. Take care.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.